On a quiet, forgotten stretch of land, nestled so deep in the rolling hills of a county that most modern maps had given up and left it blank, Jane built herself a sanctuary. This wasn't merely a farm. It was a testament, a defiant statement of peace carved from the wilderness. She called it Havenwood. With hands that knew the language of the earth, she coaxed vibrant life from the dark, rich soil, cultivating not just plants, but a community farm that blossomed into her life's work. It was a place defined by its gentle sounds, the delighted chatter of children learning to coax a seedling from the ground, the whisper of wind through rows of towering cornstalks, the contented hum of bees dancing over clover. But peace, as it so often does in a world full of noise, has a way of attracting predators. It shines like a beacon for those who mistake tranquility for weakness. And so it was that when a local gang, high on the cheap corrosive power they wielded over the timid, decided they wanted her land, they set in motion a chain of events that would lead to their ruin. They saw what they wanted to see: a lone woman in her late 40s, her face weathered by the sun, her hands stained by the very ground she stood on. They saw a simple farmer, a soft target ripe for the picking. They were utterly, catastrophically ignorant. They had absolutely no idea they were about to walk, with all the swagger of the condemned, straight into the invisible crosshairs of a living legend. Havenwood Farm was so much more than its collection of well-tended crops and sturdy, weathered buildings. It was the very beating heart of a small, tight-knit community that had come to rely on its existence. Jane had purchased the derelict plot over a decade ago, a forgotten patch of thorny brambles and exhausted soil. Armed with her life savings and a hard-won veteran's loan, she had methodically transformed it, one handful of soil at a time, into a thriving oasis. Now, with the quiet confidence of her late 40s, she possessed a calm, watchful presence that seemed to miss nothing. Her movements were a study in efficiency and deliberate grace, whether she was patiently staking a row of unruly tomato plants or mending a length of fence with practiced, economical motions. To the families who flocked to the farm for fresh produce and the at-risk teenagers she quietly mentored, she was just Jane, a pillar of quiet strength, the architect of a haven shielded from the clamor and chaos of the outside world. The farm's pick-your-own program was its most celebrated feature. On sun-drenched weekends, the fields were dotted with parents patiently teaching their wide-eyed children where food truly comes from, the miracle of pulling a carrot from the earth or picking a sun-warmed strawberry straight from the vine. Jane ran workshops on canning, composting, and the delicate art of beekeeping, all operating on a pay-what-you-can model that ensured no one was denied access to healthy food because of their circumstances. Havenwood was a symbol, a powerful testament to what one determined woman could build from nothing. It was a world away, a universe apart from the life she'd left behind, a life meticulously packed away in a heavy, locked footlocker under her bed. That life was one of dust and distance, of shimmering heat haze and the cold, precise mathematics of windage and elevation. But the outside world, with its insatiable appetites, has a way of creeping in. The serpent arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, not as a single, slithering creature, but as a rusted, roaring muscle car that spat gravel and announced its presence with a throaty, obnoxious rumble. They called themselves the Vipers, a name they believed struck fear into the hearts of men. However, their criminal enterprise was mostly a pathetic mix of petty theft and shaking down small, vulnerable business owners. To them, rural communities were soft targets, filled with trusting, isolated people. Their leader was a man named Rico, a creature of cheap cologne and even cheaper bravado, whose arrogance was a poorly constructed mask for a deep-seated insecurity. He and two of his cronies, men who moved with the same thoughtless swagger, stepped out of the car. They scanned the farm not with appreciation, but with the predatory gaze of jackals. Rico saw the neat fields, the clean lines of the barn, the vibrant bounty of the crops. But he didn't register the beauty or the years of relentless hard work. He saw an asset. He saw an undeveloped property. Most importantly, he saw a woman alone, and in his simplistic, violent world, that meant only one thing: an opportunity. Jane was washing a basket of freshly pulled carrots in a large outdoor basin when they rolled up. She didn't jump. Her finely honed senses had registered the sound of their poorly maintained engine from a mile off. She turned the spigot, shutting off the flow of water, wiped her hands deliberately on her apron and faced them. Her posture was relaxed. A farmer resting for a moment, but her eyes were already working. They were calculating distances, noting the unnatural bulge under Rico's thin leather jacket, tracking the fidgety movements of his two companions. "This is private property," she said. Her voice was perfectly even, carrying easily on the quiet air. It wasn't a question or a plea. It was a statement of fact. Rico let out a dry, theatrical chuckle. "Just admiring the scenery, sweetheart. Nice little setup you got here. Must be a whole lot of work for one person." He let his eyes roam over her in a dismissive, appraising way, then back to the sprawling farm. "Be a real shame if something were to happen to it." Jane's expression didn't flicker. Her gaze remained steady, unnervingly direct. She had faced down men who radiated a palpable aura of death, men whose threats were not veiled in clumsy innuendo. Rico was a child playing dress-up. "I manage," she replied, her tone clipped and final. "Now I'm busy. If you're not here for produce, you need to leave." One of Rico's men, a lanky youth with a vacant expression, snickered. "Oh, she's got spirit." Rico took it as a challenge, his ego pricked. He stepped closer, invading her personal space in a classic textbook move of intimidation. "See, we've been thinking," he said, lowering his voice into what he imagined was a menacing conspiratorial tone. "This land is wasted on vegetables. It has potential for our business, quiet, out of the way. We're gonna need it. A new headquarters." Jane stood her ground, an immovable object. She didn't so much as lean away. This land is doing exactly what it's meant to do. It's feeding people. It's not for sale, and it's certainly not for rent. You are not welcome here. Leave now." The stark, unadorned refusal caught Rico completely off guard. He was accustomed to fearful pleading and stammered negotiations. He wasn't used to this unwavering, crystalline dismissal. His face, a mask of false confidence moments before, darkened with genuine anger. "That wasn't a request," he snarled, his voice losing its theatrics and gaining a raw, ugly edge. "We'll be back. And when we do, we're collecting. You can pay us a weekly fee to protect this pretty little farm of yours, or you can stand by and watch it burn to the ground. Your choice." To punctuate his threat, he spat on the ground, a glob of saliva landing disgustingly close to her crate of freshly washed carrots. Then, with one last glare meant to seal his dominance, they climbed back into their noisy, obnoxious car and tore off, leaving a cloud of dust and palpable menace hanging in the tranquil air. Jane watched them go, her jaw tight, her gaze fixed on the disappearing vehicle. They saw a farmer. They saw a victim. They had just made the last and most significant mistake of their short, brutish lives. In the days that followed, an uneasy quiet settled over Havenwood, the kind of charged silence that comes from holding one's breath in anticipation of a storm. To any outside observer, Jane went about her work with a serene, unbroken rhythm. Her routine remained a constant, tending to the seedlings, mending the irrigation lines and harvesting the mature crops. She showed no outward signs of distress or fear. Her placid demeanor was a comforting sight to the community members who came and went. But when the sun dipped below the horizon and the farm was cast in long shadows, a different part of her began to stir. Her old training, long dormant, began to creep back into her consciousness, sharp and familiar. She began to walk the perimeter of her land, but not as a farmer checking her fences. She walked it as a soldier surveying a battlefield. Her eyes, which during the day saw blight on a leaf or the thirst of a plant, now saw something different. She noted sight lines from the tree line, identified natural choke points along the dirt road, and mentally established overlapping fields of fire from the barn and the farmhouse. The part of her mind that effortlessly recalled planting seasons and crop rotation schedules now clicked with the cold, detached precision of tactical planning. The gentle slope of a hill became a defensive position. A drainage ditch became a potential trench. The tall silo was no longer used for grain storage. It had been converted into an observation tower. This wasn't a process driven by fear. It was one of grim, pragmatic reality. Jane knew a truth that many people, especially women in isolated areas, were learning across the country. Sometimes you have to be your own first line of defense. People were forming support groups, empowering each other with self-defense classes and community watch programs. But Jane's situation was different. She didn't need a group. Her training was singular, highly specialized, and etched into the very fiber of her soul from her time in the most elite clandestine corners of the military. She was a protector by nature, and Havenwood, this sanctuary she had built with her own 2 hands, was what she had to protect. A week later, the Vipers returned. This time they came under the cloak of darkness. They didn't come to talk. They came to escalate the situation. 2 of Rico's men, chosen for the task, crept onto the property to deliver a message of terror. They moved with a clumsy urgency, slashing the tires on her old reliable farm truck and spray-painting their crude serpentine logo on the pristine white side of her barn. They were clumsy, they were loud, and they had no earthly idea they were being watched. From a second-story window in the darkened farmhouse, Jane observed them through a pair of high-powered binoculars. The moon was nearly complete, casting a bright silvery light over the scene, so bright that she didn't need any form of night vision. She watched their sloppy movements, their careless whispers that carried in the still air, their general lack of situational awareness. She could have stopped them right then and there. A single warning shot, a bullet cracking over their heads, would have sent them scurrying like terrified rats. But she knew a frightened rat comes back later, usually with more rats. No, this required something more. She needed to deliver a message of her own, a lesson etched in confusion and fear. She needed them to understand, on a primal level, exactly whose ground they were trespassing on. The next morning, Deputy Miller's dusty patrol car pulled up. As the only lawman for a sprawling rural area, he was a good man stretched impossibly thin, perpetually overworked, and critically under-resourced. He took her statement with a weary professionalism, looked at the damage, and let out a long, frustrated sigh. "It's the Vipers," he said, stating the obvious. "We know they're behind a string of incidents, extortion, vandalism, but proving it is tough. Rico is slick, and he knows how to intimidate witnesses into silence. People are scared to talk." He looked at Jane, a genuine apology in his tired eyes. "I'll file the report. I'll try to increase patrols out this way, but honestly, I'm spread so thin it won't be much. Please be careful, Jane." Jane nodded, her face a mask of unreadable calm acceptance. "I understand, Deputy. Thanks for coming out." After he left, Jane set about repairing the damage. She patched and inflated the tires herself, her movements strong and sure. Then she meticulously painted over the ugly graffiti, restoring the barn to its former state. But as she worked, a cold resolve settled over her. She had given them a clear verbal warning. She had given them a chance to walk away. They had ignored it and crossed a line. Now she would draw one of her own, not in the dirt but in their minds. That evening, a small, unassuming cardboard box was left on the doorstep of the grimy bar that the Vipers used as their clubhouse. Inside, Rico found 2 items resting on a bed of plain cotton. The first was a can of spray paint, the same brand and color used on her barn, but with a single, perfectly round, impossibly clean hole punched straight through the center. The second item was a Polaroid photo. It was a crystal-clear, brightly lit shot of his 2 goons in the act of slashing her tires the night before. And in the top corner of the photo, puncturing the image, there was another small, perfect hole. There was no note. There didn't need to be one. The message was chillingly, profoundly clear. "I see you. I can reach you. I can touch you whenever I want." For the very first time in his petty reign of terror, Rico felt a cold knot form in his stomach that wasn't anger. It was a disorienting cocktail of confusion and a thread of genuine fear. Who was this woman? How did she get this picture? And what the hell makes a hole that clean, that perfect? His men were visibly spooked. "Maybe we should just leave her alone, Rico," one of the vandals from the previous night stammered, his face pale. "This is weird. It's not right." But Rico's burgeoning fear quickly curdled into humiliated rage. He couldn't let his crew, his source of power, see him back down from some farm woman. It would shatter his authority. He forced himself to believe it was a trick. Maybe she had a boyfriend, some local hunter trying to scare them off. He refused, point blank, to entertain the possibility that she was the source of the threat. "No," he snarled, crumpling the Polaroid in his fist. "She's playing games. We're going to show her what happens when you mess with the Vipers. We're done with warnings. We're not just going to scare her. We're going to take everything." His plan was no longer about simple extortion. It had metastasized into a need for total annihilation. He gathered his entire crew, all 8 of them. He told them to bring weapons, to bring their anger and to bring their whole unrestrained force. They were going to burn the barn to the ground, destroy the crops, and make such a brutal example of her that no one in the entire county would ever dare to defy them again. They loaded into 2 vehicles, their loud bravado barely masking the seed of doubt she had so expertly planted in their minds. They saw themselves as a pack of predators descending on their helpless prey. They were wrong. They were a flock of clueless sheep, wandering straight into the den of a wolf. Night fell over Havenwood, blanketing the farm in a deep, heavy silence that seemed to absorb all sound. The moon, so bright the night before, now hid behind a thick, impenetrable veil of clouds. It was a sniper's moon, a darkness that was not an obstacle but an ally. Inside the farmhouse, all the lights were out. It presented the perfect picture of a home whose occupant was fast asleep, completely unaware of the rolling tide of malice hurtling their way. But Jane wasn't sleeping. She was more awake than she had been in a decade. She was ready, and she was in her element. She wasn't in the house. She was in the hayloft of her newly painted barn, a position she had chosen days ago. It afforded her a commanding panoramic view of the single dirt road that served as the only entrance and exit, and the sprawling fields that surrounded her home. It was the perfect sniper's hide, a nest of shadows and silence, and she wasn't armed with a simple hunting rifle. From the locked footlocker she kept under her bed, she had retrieved an old friend, a constant companion from her former life, the M24 sniper weapon system. The cool, heavy piece of forged steel and milled optics felt like a natural extension of her own body. As she'd settled in, she had already done the work. She had calculated the variables, the negligible wind, the ambient humidity, the precise bullet drop over the various distances she had ranged with a laser rangefinder earlier that day. The operational mindset, a state of hyper-focused clarity she hadn't inhabited in 10 years, was now fully engaged, shutting out all extraneous thought. Her breathing was slow and deep, her heart rate as steady as a metronome. This wasn't about anger or revenge. It was about pest control. Her goal was not to kill. In her precise and disciplined world, taking a life was the last resort, a sign of a plan gone wrong. Her objective tonight was surgically precise, to dismantle their confidence, their equipment, and their will to fight without spilling a single drop of blood. She was going to deconstruct them, piece by piece. She was going to make them understand that they had trespassed into a world they couldn't even begin to imagine. The low rumble of engines reached her, long before the headlights of 2 vehicles sliced through the oppressive dark. 2 cars, just as she'd expected. They pulled up about 200 yards from the house, a disorganized mess of a parking area. 8 figures spilled out, their silhouettes framed by the headlights. They were armed with a crude assortment of weapons, baseball bats, crowbars, and a few handguns held with unpracticed bravado. Rico, attempting to project an image of command, pointed toward the barn. "You 2 take the barn. Gas cans are in the trunk. The rest of you with me. We go in hard and fast. Everything burns." They began to fan out, still swaggering, still caught up in their own delusion of power, still believing they were the ones in control. The first shot was a whisper, followed by a sharp, violent crack that tore across the fields, the terrifying, unmistakable sound of a military-grade round breaking the sound barrier right next to you. The bullet, a 7.62mm projectile, traveled the 300 yards to its target in under a second and slammed into the engine block of their lead vehicle, a beat-up pickup truck. The round punched through the grille and radiator, shattering the metal heart of the engine. Steam and black smoke instantly poured from under the mangled hood. The truck was dead. The gang froze in a tableau of confusion. What the hell was that? One of them yelled into the sudden silence. "A backfire," Rico snapped, his voice tight with an uncertainty he couldn't quite conceal. "Keep moving." The second shot rang out, almost an echo of the first. This time the target was the roaring muscle car. Jane didn't hit the engine. Her aim was more specific, more insulting. She placed the round perfectly through the front axle, just behind the wheel. The car sagged instantly, its front wheel skewed at a grotesquely useless angle. Both of their escape routes were now gone. They were stranded. Panic, cold and sharp, began to set in. "It's not a backfire. It's coming from the barn." Someone shrieked, pointing a shaking hand. Rico, finally grasping the reality of their situation, pulled his handgun and fired wildly in the direction of the dark, silent barn. The shots were just pathetic little pops in the vast darkness, the muzzle flashes briefly illuminating his terrified face. He fumbled in his pocket for his cell phone, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped it. He needed to call for backup, call for help, call anyone. The third shot was a masterpiece of pure, calculated contempt. The round screamed through the air and shattered the phone right out of his hand. The device exploded into a cloud of plastic and electronics. Rico stared at his empty, stinging palm, a look of blank, uncomprehending terror on his face. He wasn't physically hurt, but the message was absolute. Delivered with the force of a physical blow, I can hit whatever I want, whenever I want. Now, the real lesson began. The fourth shot was aimed not at a person, but at the ground. It kicked up a geyser of dirt and grass inches from the foot of a gangster who was trying to break and run for cover. He yelped as if he'd been shot, scrambling backward on all fours like a crab. The fifth shot buzzed past Rico's ear, so close he felt the disturbed air on his skin. The sonic crack was deafening at that range, a sharp, painful explosion next to his head. He dropped to the ground, screaming, hands clasped over his head, all pretense of being a fearsome leader utterly gone. It was complete chaos. The Vipers were no longer a gang. They were a terrified, disorganized mob. They came for a farmer and found themselves in a one-sided war with an invisible ghost. A sixth shot splintered the thick wood of a baseball bat handle, making the man holding it cry out and drop it as if it were white-hot. A seventh shot, the most terrifying of all, whistled through the narrow gap between two of them, huddled behind the dead truck for cover, and then they broke. It was a complete and total rout. They dropped their weapons, their only thought to escape the unseen demon that was toying with them. They scrambled over each other to get away, running not toward the road but into the dark. Tangled woods at the edge of the property, a place they feared far, far less than the unseen, all-powerful entity in the barn. In the hayloft, Jane lowered her rifle. She watched through her scope as the last of their panicked, flailing forms disappeared into the trees, their screams fading into the night. She surveyed the scene. 2 disabled vehicles, a scattering of abandoned weapons. The air smelled of cordite, damp earth, and fear. She had fired 7 rounds. 7 precise, non-lethal, soul-shattering rounds. The problem was solved. Calmly, methodically, she gathered her 7 gleaming brass casings, leaving no trace of her presence. The harvest was complete. Less than an hour later, the headlights of Deputy Miller's patrol car rolled slowly and cautiously down the dirt road. He'd gotten a hysterical 911 call from a clerk at a gas station 10 miles away, reporting a guy who was babbling incoherently about a ghost with a rifle on some farm. Miller knew exactly where to go. He found the scene just as Jane had left it. 2 crippled vehicles, their tires flat, engines dead. Weapons were scattered on the ground, as if dropped in a desperate hurry. There were no bodies. There was no blood. There were no shell casings. There was just the bizarre, silent evidence of a completely one-sided beatdown. He saw a single light on in the farmhouse kitchen. Jane met him at the door, holding a mug of what smelled like chamomile tea, looking for all the world like the commotion had just woken her up. "Deputy," she said calmly, her voice soft, "is everything all right? I heard some commotion out here a while ago, but I thought it was just kids with fireworks again." Miller looked at her, then back at the crippled cars under the beam of his flashlight, then back at her again. He saw the woman who grew vegetables and taught children how to compost. But tonight, for the first time, he saw something else behind her calm eyes, a flicker of hardened, unbreakable steel. He knew with absolute certainty that she was lying. And she knew that he knew. "Jane," he said slowly, deliberately. "A few of Rico's boys turned up in town, scared out of their wits. One of them is still at the clinic, thinks he's having a heart attack. They said they were attacked out here by a ghost." Jane took a slow, thoughtful sip of her tea, her eyes never leaving his. "Ghosts on my farm? I assure you, Deputy, the only spirits around here are the ones in the compost pile working their magic." Miller let out a long, slow sigh. He was a good cop and a practical man. He knew what the Vipers were. He knew they'd finally picked on someone who wasn't a victim. The legal and jurisdictional nightmare of trying to figure out what really happened, what impossible thing had occurred here, wasn't worth it for anyone. Right there in the dead of night, Standing on the porch of the quietest woman in his county, he made a choice. "Well," he said, turning off his flashlight and plunging the scene back into darkness, "looks to me like their vehicles broke down. Probably saw a coyote and it spooked them. We'll have the trucks towed for scrap in the morning. As for Rico and his crew, I have a feeling they won't be bothering this part of the county anymore." He looked her straight in the eye, a clear message passing between them. "You stay safe, Jane." "I always do, Deputy," she replied softly. A silent, profound understanding passed between them. He didn't file a report about a ghost with a rifle. He filed a report about 2 abandoned vehicles, likely stolen and dumped. Case closed. The Vipers were never seen in the county again. Rico was rumored to have skipped town the very next day, his reputation not just shattered, but annihilated. The gang, a structure built on a foundation of fear, had been irrevocably broken by a single overwhelming dose of absolute terror. But stories like this, no matter how unbelievable, travel. They morph and grow in the telling. In the criminal underworld, a new legend was whispered in hushed tones. A rural farm somewhere out in the sticks that was a black spot on the map. They spoke of an unseen force that guarded it, a phantom protector whose aim was perfect and whose methods were terrifyingly precise. They didn't know her name. They were only aware of the ghost that haunted Havenwood. Life on the farm returned to its gentle, peaceful rhythm. The sun rose and set. The crops grew tall and full. The kids came to laugh and learn, their bright voices filling the air. The peace at Havenwood was no longer just a product of its isolation. It was a peace that had been fought for, defended, and decisively won. Jane continued her work, her hands once again stained with the rich, dark earth. She was a farmer, a mentor, a baker, and a pillar of her community. But she was also a guardian. And anyone foolish enough to ever threaten her sanctuary would learn that some roots run far deeper and are far stronger than they could ever possibly imagine. Ultimately, this isn't just a story about a gang messing with the wrong person. It's a powerful reminder that real strength, the kind that endures, isn't found in loud threats, cheap posturing, and empty bravado. It's found in quiet competence, in unshakable resolve, and in the profound, unwavering courage to protect what you love. The Vipers saw an easy target, a simple woman on a patch of dirt. They were blind to the reality. They found a force of nature, a quiet professional who broke their will, dismantled their power and scattered them to the wind, proving once and for all that the most dangerous predators are the ones you never see coming. If you enjoyed this story of justice and unexpected skill, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We have new stories just like this coming out every week, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Thanks for watching.